French, 6 years of my life. Japanese took me 3, but Mandarin Chinese, just 182 days to conversational fluency. So here's the thing, I didn't suddenly get smart. Chinese isn't magically easier than French. I just finally stopped making the same mistakes that everyone seems to make. You see, most of us learn languages backwards, and yet somehow we're convinced that that's the way adults should learn.
Let me tell you about Quebec. After about 4 years of studying French, I booked a trip to Montreal, confident that I would finally be able to put my skills to the test and be talking with real native speakers.
The server proceeded to ask me something simple, probably just if I wanted a coffee or something.
And my brain completely short-circuited.
4 years of study and all I could manage was,
oui?
With like a deer in the headlights sort of look. I'd aced every test, memorized every conjugation table, but couldn't string together a real sentence when it mattered. You see, we're taught that learning a language is about memorizing grammar rules and words, but your brain doesn't work that way. It works by recognizing patterns through massive exposure. Fast forward some years later, and I'm sitting at the dining table at a cottage with my girlfriend's Chinese family. After just about 6 months of a completely different approach, I was chatting with her father about politics, discussing the wonderful meal we just had with her mother, and was even cracking jokes around the whole table, all in Mandarin Chinese. What changed? Everything. Here's mistake number 1 I made with French and Japanese, trying to speak too early. You remember how I said babies don't learn languages by studying flashcards? Well, let's think about how babies do learn languages. They listen for months and months before saying a single word. They're not being lazy or something, they're just building mental models of how the language actually works. So with that knowledge, when it came to Mandarin, I decided to experiment. For the first 100 or so days, I didn't speak at all. Instead, I listened to simple podcasts, I watched shows in Mandarin, and I absorbed the sounds, the rhythms, and the pattern. You know what happened? When I finally started speaking, people understood me. Now, my pronunciation was not perfect, not by a long shot, but it also wasn't this American speaking Chinese kind of vibe either. Your brain needs to recognize patterns before it can produce them. By front-loading listening, you're building neural pathways to help your brain understand the patterns of the language itself. One day, around month 2 of studying Mandarin Chinese, I was listening to a podcast episode and it was talking about some guy ordering food or something. And suddenly, like magic, I didn't need translation. Honestly, I just got it. Direct comprehension. That is when I knew that I was on the right track. So let's talk about vocabulary. With French, I tried to learn all the words. I mean, literally every word I came across. And because I was attending a French immersion school, this practice was actually highly encouraged by the teachers and staff. But you want to know something wild? In most languages, knowing the 1,000 most frequently used words makes up for 78% of everyday conversation. But most language courses and traditional language methods teach you 3,000 plus words up front, most of which we both know you will never use. With Mandarin Chinese, I got strategic. To start, I focused exclusively on the top 1,000 words by frequency. But, and this is key, I tried to encounter them in at least 10 different contexts each. Instead of your traditional tired old paper flashcards, I'd find simple podcasts, stories, shows, movies, whatever I could find where these words would naturally occur. And to be honest, that might sound hard, but that part was easy. And you know why? Because as it turns out, the 1,000 most frequent words are the 1,000 most common words. So you encounter them all the time. Your brain remembers what matters. A word used in a funny story or a meaningful conversation will stick in your brain far better than a word you reviewed on a flashcard while sitting on the toilet for about 3 seconds. All right, confession time. With French and Japanese, I was kind of a weekend warrior. Sometimes I would skip studying all week and then have a 6-hour plus cram session on the weekend. But language follows what scientists refer to as the spacing effect. Studying 20 or 30 minutes daily is dramatically more effective for helping you learn a language than these massive multi-hour cram sessions on the weekend, even if the weekend cram sessions in total make up for more time than the daily segments that you would have done. So with Mandarin Chinese, I set a 1-hour daily minimum target that I had to hit. And on a few days, that's all I did. But on most days, I got into the flow and did much, much more. But regardless of how much I did, I never skipped. I kept a simple chain calendar and marked an X on every single day that I did my studying. This calendar quickly turned into a spreadsheet that helped me just track all of the time that I did studying. Breaking the chain became unthinkable. Your brain strengthens neural pathways through frequency and recency. Think of daily practice as watering a plant. Consistent small amounts help it grow, while occasional flooding doesn't help it. It may even harm it. great. Around day 135 to 140 or so, I started using a technique called shadowing, which completely transformed my Chinese accent. Shadowing is like becoming the audio's shadow. You listen to a native speaker speaking and you repeat what they say with as little delay as possible. And you do this while trying to match their exact rhythm, exact tone, and honestly, it even helped me to match their gestures and body language. Here is how it works. You find audio that's just slightly challenging. Listen to a phrase, then repeat it back with the exact same rhythm and intonation. Not later, right in the moment. Now, for me, it felt a little awkward at first, kind of like I was interrupting someone, and it might feel the same for you. But it helps bypass your analytical brain, which helps your mouth produce sounds that it might not ordinarily be able to. When we learn a new language as adults, we filter the sounds of that language through our native language. Shadowing helps break that pattern, allowing you to more easily adopt new pronunciation patterns and habits. After just 3 weeks of daily shadowing, I'm not kidding you when I said a native Mandarin speaker asked me what part of northern China I'm from. And seeing as that was the accent I was intentionally shadowing, I was very impressed and very happy with myself. Now, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that I sounded native, and the person who asked me about my accent was definitely exaggerating in order to give me a compliment. But the improvement was dramatic, especially when compared to French that I had been studying for years and years and years without any real pronunciation development. Now, the final breakthrough came when I stopped translating in my head altogether. Most language learners get stuck in translation mode, hearing something, translating it into their native language, thinking of a response, then saying it back in the target language. This creates a mental bottleneck that makes fluid communication impossible. With French, I was constantly translating back and forth. But with Mandarin, I trained myself to connect Chinese to concepts and images themselves. This meant not their English equivalents. And how did I do this? First, I completely avoided English translation when learning new words. Instead, I used videos, images, and actions. Anything I can get my hands on to create a direct connection. Your brain naturally prefers direct connections. For example, when you see a dog, you don't think four-legged canine pet. You just recognize dog. And language can work the same way when you avoid the translation habit. I'll never forget about 3 months in watching an intermediate Chinese podcast. One of the hosts had cracked a joke and I started laughing before my brain even had time to translate it into English. At this point, again, it had become clear to me that something fundamental had shifted. So there it is. In essence, the process that took me from 6 years of studying French to 182 days studying Mandarin. And this is not because I'm special or I'm some sort of language expert. It's because the strategy was different. I called this strategy the Fluency Formula. And now it's my pleasure and my passion to help other people learn languages to conversational fluency so much faster than they thought possible. And look, I'm not saying this approach is easy. It still takes time and consistent effort, but it works with how your brain actually learns instead of fighting against it. I've packaged everything I've learned into Fluency Formula, a day-by-day roadmap to conversational fluency in 200 days. You choose the language and the system will take you from there. The link is below if you're interested in taking a brand new approach to language learning. Imagine where you could be 200 days from now, confidently having real conversations that open up new worlds, cultures, and connections. Now, while I encourage you to take the Fluency Formula route when learning your new language, whatever route you take is perfectly cool because learning a language, no matter what you do, is so worth it. So take a look at the link below and join me inside of Fluency Formula.